The world was a blur of white, a screaming tempest of ice and wind. Elara didn't know how much longer she could hold on. Her lungs burned, each gasp for air a searing pain, a desperate plea for mercy that the blizzard simply swallowed whole. The metallic tang of her own blood coated her tongue, a constant bitter reminder of the jagged tear in her side. It wasn't just a wound, it felt like a gaping maw, sucking the life out of her with every frantic movement. She was scrambling, you see, not running. Running implied a path, a direction, a hope. Elara had none of that. She was a desperate, clawing animal, clinging to the sheer, ice-slicked face of a cliff, each frozen outcrop a fleeting promise of survival, each slip a whispered invitation to the abyss below. Below her, the chasm yawned, a black maw swallowed by the swirling snow, its depth promising oblivion. One wrong move, one numb finger losing its grip, and she'd be gone, a broken heap at the bottom, just another forgotten casualty of the wild. The wind, a banshee's wail, whipped around her, tearing at her already tattered clothes, biting at exposed skin until it felt like fire. But even through the roar of the storm she could hear them, the howls, low at first, then rising, closer, more insistent, a symphony of hunger and malice. They were coming. A pack of shadowy figures, relentless, intent on her destruction. They weren't just hunting her, they were hunting what she was, what she desperately tried to hide. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, scrabbled for purchase on the frost-covered rock. Each tiny crevice, each sharp edge, was a desperate prayer answered, then lost. The icy spray from a hidden waterfall, invisible in the swirling white, slicked the rock face, making every grip treacherous. Her vision blurred, not just from the exhaustion and the pain, but from the sheer overwhelming terror that threatened to consume her. It was a primal fear, the kind that stripped away everything but the instinct to survive. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the relentless rhythm of the storm and the approaching hunters. This wasn't just a chase, it was a race against time, against the elements, against her own failing body. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending pulsed with agony, but she pushed on, driven by a desperate, unyielding will to live. Amidst this raw, visceral terror, a strange heat began to blossom in her injured hand. It wasn't the searing pain of her wound, but a tingling sensation, deep beneath her skin, spreading like wildfire through her veins. It was alien, this warmth, yet profoundly familiar, like a forgotten melody stirring in her bones. She tried to suppress it, to push it down, to bury it beneath the crushing weight of fear. This feeling, this uncontrolled energy, this volatile power that simmered just beneath her skin, this was what had gotten her into this mess. This was why she was alone, hunted, clinging to a frozen cliff face in the middle of a blizzard. Whispers, ancient and chilling, echoed in her mind, fragments of old tales she'd tried to forget. Whispers of a silver flame in her bloodline, a power her former pack had feared and reviled. They called it a curse, an abomination, a sign of destruction. They had cast her out, a child deemed too dangerous to exist among them. The memory of their cold, condemning eyes was almost as painful as the physical wounds. She remembered the fear in their faces, the way they recoiled from her, as if she carried a plague. It wasn't just physical pain she carried, it was the deep, aching wound of rejection, of being an outsider in her own skin. A momentary lapse in focus, a sudden gust of wind, and her foot slipped. Just a few inches, but enough. A cascade of loose ice and rock tore free from beneath her, tumbling into the unseen chasm below, the sound swallowed by the storm. Her heart leaped into her throat, a sickening lurch that left her breathless. For a terrifying second, she hung there, suspended between life and death, her fingers screaming in protest, her body screaming for release. The silver heat in her hand flared, a desperate, almost involuntary response. And for a fleeting moment, her grip tightened, impossibly. It wasn't her strength, not really. It was it, the power, the silver flame. A terrifying, beautiful thing she couldn't control, but which, in that desperate moment, had saved her. She hated it. She hated what it had done to her life, but in that instant, she was grateful for its raw, untamed existence. The howls were closer now, cutting through the wind with chilling clarity. They were almost on top of her. She could hear the snarls, the heavy thud of paws on snow-covered rock, the guttural breaths of creatures closing in for the kill. Her body was screaming for rest, for warmth, for an end to the relentless torment. But the thought of capture, of being dragged back to face the judgment of those who had cast her out, spurred her on. She pushed through a narrow crevice, the jagged ice tearing at her already shredded clothes, scraping against her skin, each movement a fresh agony. The opening was barely wide enough, forcing her to contort her body, to squeeze through, inch by excruciating inch. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one a puff of white against the biting cold, a visible testament to her fading strength. She wasn't just running from death, she was running from a fate worse than death, capture by those who wanted to extinguish the very essence of what she was. They didn't want to kill her outright. Not really. They wanted to contain her, to strip her of her power, to make her something she wasn't, something less. The injustice of it all burned hotter than the cold, hotter than her wounds. She had done nothing but exist, nothing but be born with a gift they couldn't comprehend, a power they labeled a curse out of their own fear. They had exiled her, branded her, hunted her, all because they were afraid of what she could be. The thought fueled a desperate surge of adrenaline. She wouldn't let them. She wouldn't let them take her. Not after all she'd endured. She wouldn't let them snuff out the flame, even if it terrified her. Her fingers were numb now, raw and unresponsive, her strength failing, her body trembling uncontrollably. She glanced back, her head swimming, and through the swirling snow she saw it. The first shadow, a massive hulking form, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent, emerging from the white, framed against the desolate, unforgiving landscape. It was one of them, one of the hunters. Her eyes, usually a soft hazel, flickered with a desperate silver luminescence, a primal defense mechanism she couldn't quite command, but that flared in response to the immediate threat. It was a raw, untamed light, a silent scream of defiance against the encroaching darkness. Her story begins here, in the heart of a storm, hunted for a power she barely understands, a power that could either save her or destroy her. Will she survive this brutal night? Will she ever find a place where she truly belongs, a place where her power is seen not as a curse, but as a gift? If you're ready to plunge into a world where ancient bloodlines clash with modern secrets, where love ignites in the most unexpected places, then hit that subscribe button and join our pack here at Olivia Werewolf Tales. We're just getting started on this epic journey, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Elara's vision swam, the silver luminescence in her eyes flickering, threatening to extinguish completely. The blizzard, once a furious adversary, now felt like a shroud, ready to claim her. Her fingers, raw and bleeding, were losing their purchase on the unforgiving rock. Her body, pushed beyond its limits, vibrated with exhaustion, each muscle fiber screaming in protest. The howls of her pursuers, once distant echoes, were now a guttural chorus, a triumphant symphony of impending capture. She could practically feel their hot breath on her neck, their predatory eyes fixed on her vulnerable form. This was it, the end, the bitter, freezing end she had fought so desperately to avoid. A wave of profound despair washed over her, heavier than the snow, colder than the ice. She was truly alone, and the wild, it seemed, had finally won. But then, just as her grip threatened to fail entirely, just as the first shadow of her pursuers began to solidify out of the swirling white, something shifted. It wasn't a sound, not at first. It was a presence, a chilling, potent force that sliced through the blizzard like a blade through silk. The air itself seemed to thicken, growing heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on Elara's arms stand on end. The relentless shriek of the wind seemed to falter, to quiet, as if even the storm recognized a superior power. A low, almost imperceptible hum vibrated through the very ground beneath her. a deep resonance that spoke of ancient primal strength. It was the kind of presence that made every instinct in her body scream, not with fear of this presence but with a sudden overwhelming awareness of its sheer unadulterated might. And then he emerged, not just a figure, but a force. From the heart of the swirling white, a form coalesced, impossibly large, impossibly dark. It wasn't just a wolf, it was a massive obsidian-furred beast, a creature of nightmare and legend. Its coat seemed to absorb the meager light, making it appear as a moving shadow against the blinding snow. But it was the eyes that truly held her. They gleamed like molten gold, twin pools of liquid fire that pierced through the blizzard, through Elara's fear, straight into the raw, trembling core of her being. This wasn't just an alpha, a leader of a pack. This was something ancient, something mythical, a being born of the very earth and tempered by centuries of wild existence. He moved with an effortless grace that utterly belied his colossal size. Each powerful stride was silent, precise, a testament to a predator at the apex of its domain. There was no wasted movement, no hesitation. He simply was. And as he moved, a strange phenomenon occurred. The pursuing wolves, the very creatures who had hunted Elara with such relentless fury, instantly recoiled. Their triumphant howls died in their throats, replaced by low, terrified whimpers. They scattered, melting back into the snow, their predatory instincts overridden by a primal, undeniable fear of this new, terrifying presence. It wasn't a chase anymore. It was an immediate, absolute surrender. Their fear was palpable, a wave of raw terror that washed over Elara, making her realize the true magnitude of the being that now stood before her. A new scent filled the air, cutting through the biting cold and the metallic tang of her own blood. It was ozone, sharp and clean, like the air after a lightning strike. Beneath that, the deep, earthy smell of an ancient forest of damp soil and towering pines mingled with something else, something undeniably masculine, dangerous, and utterly captivating. It was the scent of pure, untamed power, a scent that both warned and drew her in. And as he moved, the very light seemed to bend around him, emphasizing his immense, almost overwhelming presence. He was a living shadow, a force of nature made flesh, and Elara, battered and broken, could only stare, her breath caught in her throat. Her fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now laced with a potent, unsettling curiosity. Who was this creature, and why had he appeared, just as her world was about to end? The obsidian beast paused, its molten gold eyes fixed on Elara. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin, each second a lifetime. Then, with a fluid, almost mesmerizing motion, he began to shift. It wasn't a violent transformation, not a painful contortion of bone and muscle. It was a seamless, powerful unfolding. Fur rippled and receded, bone structure reformed, and in a blink, the colossal wolf was gone, replaced by a man. But he was no gentle man, no soft-spoken savior. He was a form of rugged, devastating power, all sharp angles and corded muscle, imbued with the same raw, untamed essence as his wolf form. He was tall, impossibly so, his shoulders broad, his frame lean and powerful. Dark, windswept hair, the color of midnight, framed a face carved from granite, all strong jawline and high cheekbones. But it was his eyes that truly held the weight of centuries. They were still molten gold, but now in human form they held a depth, a wisdom, and a profound weariness that spoke of burdens carried for ages. His clothes, even in this harsh, desolate environment, were expensive, tailored, hinting at a world of power and influence far beyond the wild, untamed mountains. He was a paradox, primal and sophisticated, ancient and utterly modern. He knelt beside Elara, not with tenderness, but with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer a comforting hand. He simply lowered himself, bringing his face closer to hers, his golden eyes piercing, seeing beyond her pain, beyond her fear, straight into the raw, simmering power she struggled so desperately to hide. And then he spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, a sound that vibrated through her very bones, a deep resonance that seemed to echo from the earth itself. Elara, he breathed, her name a quiet command, a statement of ownership, not a question. I've been waiting for you. The words hit her like a physical blow, stripping away the last vestiges of her composure. Elara, her name? How did he know her name? Her confusion intensified, twisting with the fear that already gripped her. Had she been watched? Followed? For how long? Was this rescue merely a prelude to another form of captivity? Was he a savior, a true protector sent by some benevolent force? Or was he just another predator, more powerful, more dangerous than the ones she had just escaped, waiting to claim his prize? Her mind, already reeling from exhaustion and pain, struggled to process this new, terrifying layer of mystery. The desperate need for help warred with every instinct she possessed to flee, to disappear, to vanish back into the anonymity of the wilderness. He didn't offer comfort, not in the traditional sense. He offered a challenge, a stark, undeniable truth. He didn't sweep her into his arms like a damsel in distress, didn't murmur soothing words. Instead, his golden eyes, piercing and unwavering, assessed her, dissecting her vulnerability, but also recognizing the fierce, untamed power that pulsed beneath her skin. He saw the raw wound on her side, the blood staining her tattered clothes, but his gaze lingered on her eyes, on the silver luminescence that still flickered there, a testament to the power she struggled to hide. With a firm, deliberate movement, he pointed a finger, long and strong, at her wound, then gestured with a dismissive flick of his hand towards the direction where the shivering, retreating pack had vanished. "They are a distraction," he stated, his voice devoid of sympathy, devoid of emotion, yet resonating with an undeniable authority. "The true hunt has yet to begin. You have a choice, Elara. Come with me, or face the storm alone, unprepared." The air crackled between them, thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of his presence and with the stark reality of her situation. It was a volatile mix, raw fear, the lingering suspicion of a hunted animal, and an undeniable current of something else, something potent and unsettling. A raw, primal attraction that pulsed through her veins, a magnetic pull she couldn't explain, couldn't fight. He wasn't a typical hero, not the kind from the stories. He was possessive, his gaze claiming her even before she agreed. He was commanding, his words leaving no room for argument. And there was a darkness about him, a hint of his own demons, his own burdens, that made him infinitely more intriguing, more dangerous, and more captivating than any knight in shining armor. His words, stark and unyielding, echoed in her mind. "Come with me, or face the storm alone." The choice, if it could even be called that, was no choice at all. Alone, she was a dead woman, a broken spirit consumed by the blizzard, or captured by her relentless pursuers. With him, there was a chance, a terrifying, uncertain chance, but a chance nonetheless. Her gaze flickered over his face, searching for any sign of deception, any hint of malice, but his expression remained unreadable, his golden eyes holding only a deep, ancient knowing. He wasn't offering salvation, he was offering a partnership, a dangerous alliance born of necessity. The cold, which had been a constant companion, now seemed to recede slightly in the warmth of his presence. It wasn't physical heat, but an aura of immense power that radiated from him, a protective shield against the biting wind. Still, Elara hesitated, her mind racing. What did he want? Why had he been waiting for her? The questions swirled, a chaotic storm within her own mind, almost as fierce as the blizzard outside. Her body screamed for rest, for warmth, for safety. Her instincts screamed for caution, for escape. But something in his unwavering gaze, something in the sheer, undeniable force of his will, began to chip away at her defenses. He didn't move, didn't press her. He simply waited, his patience as vast as the mountains around them. It was a test, she realized, a test of her will, of her trust, of her desperation. The seconds stretched, each one heavy with unspoken tension. She could feel the lingering presence of her former pursuers, their scent still faint on the wind, a reminder of the fate that awaited her if she refused. The thought of facing them again, alone, was enough to make her shiver, a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Finally, with a ragged breath that hitched in her throat, Elara pushed herself up, wincing as the movement sent a fresh jolt of pain through her side. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just a powerful alpha, but a being burdened by his own secrets, his own dark past. A flicker of something akin to understanding, a shared loneliness passed between them. It was a silent acknowledgement of their respective burdens, a fragile bridge built on unspoken pain. "Why?" she rasped, her voice hoarse from the cold and the screaming. "Why me?" His golden eyes held hers, a flicker of something unreadable passing through their depths. "Because," he rumbled, his voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the icy air, "you are the one they fear, and the one they fear is often the one who holds the key." He didn't elaborate, didn't offer comfort, didn't offer promises. He simply held out a large gloved hand, an invitation, a challenge. Elara stared at his outstretched hand. It was strong, capable, a hand that could crush, but also protect. The choice was stark, terrifying in its simplicity. Continue to flee, to die alone in the snow, or step into the unknown, into the embrace of a power she didn't understand, with a being who was as much a mystery as she was. Her heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the storm. Every fiber of her being screamed caution, but a deeper, more primal instinct, one she hadn't known she possessed, urged her forward. It was the instinct of a creature cornered, choosing the most dangerous yet potentially most rewarding path to survival. With a final trembling breath, Elara reached out, her numb fingers brushing against the warmth of his glove. It was a silent agreement, a pact forged in the heart of a blizzard, between a hunted outcast and a mysterious, powerful alpha. The air crackled with the unspoken tension between them. Fear, suspicion, and that undeniable current of raw primal attraction that promised a future as tumultuous and unpredictable as the storm itself. The true hunt, he had said, had yet to begin, and Elara, against all odds, had just chosen her side. The journey to the precarious sanctuary was a blur of aching muscles and the biting wind that still seemed to follow them, even after the blizzard's worst fury had passed. Kaelen, the massive alpha, moved with a silent, relentless efficiency, his presence a dark, unyielding shadow at Elara's side. He didn't speak, didn't offer a hand, but his sheer proximity was a shield against the lingering terror of the chase. Elara, her body screaming with every step, simply followed, driven by the desperate hope that this enigmatic stranger wasn't leading her to another trap. Her mind was a chaotic swirl of pain, exhaustion, and a potent, unsettling curiosity about the man who had known her name. Finally, Kaelen stopped before what appeared to be nothing more than a sheer rock face, indistinguishable from the countless others they had passed. But then, he pushed aside a curtain of ice-laden branches, revealing a narrow, almost imperceptible opening. A rush of warm, humid air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and mineral springs. It was a hidden cave, a secret pocket in the heart of the unforgiving mountains, warmed by geothermal vents. The stark contrast between the icy, howling desolation outside and the primal, enveloping warmth within was immediate and profound. It was like stepping from a nightmare into a fragile, unexpected dream. Elara stumbled inside, her legs giving out beneath her, as the last vestiges of adrenaline drained away. Here, away from the immediate threat, away from the biting wind and the relentless pursuit, her exhaustion crashed down on her with the force of an avalanche. She collapsed onto the damp, earthy floor, her body trembling uncontrollably, not just from cold, but from the sheer physical and emotional depletion. Every muscle screamed, every bone ached, and the wound in her side throbbed with a dull, persistent agony. She lay there, shivering, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, too spent to even lift her head. Kaelen moved with a quiet efficiency that belied his immense size. He didn't approach her directly, didn't invade her space. Instead, he knelt a respectful distance away, his golden eyes observing her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He didn't offer empty words of comfort, didn't try to coax her. He simply was. His presence, though powerful, was strangely non-threatening in this confined space. He began to gather dried moss and herbs from crevices in the cave walls, his large hands surprisingly dexterous. The flickering light from the small, almost smokeless fire he conjured cast long, dancing shadows across the rough cave walls, making the space feel both intimate and isolated, a world unto itself. Elara watched him through half-lidded eyes, wary, like a cornered animal. Every fiber of her being screamed caution. She was still a hunted thing, even here, but the heat from the vents, the gentle warmth seeping into her frozen limbs, slowly began to thaw the rigid fear that had encased her. The scent of the herbs Kaelen crushed between his fingers, earthy and pungent, mingled with the clean, ozone-like scent that clung to him, creating a strange, comforting aroma. He worked silently, meticulously, preparing a makeshift poultice for her wound. His movements were precise, deliberate, and unexpectedly gentle, a stark contrast to the brutal power he had displayed just moments before. He didn't look at her wound with revulsion or fear, but with a quiet, almost clinical assessment. It was a small thing, this unexpected gentleness, but after years of suspicion and rejection, it felt monumental, chipping away at the thick walls she had built around her heart. As the pain in her side slowly began to subside, dulled by the poultice and the warmth of the cave, memories, sharp and unwelcome, began to flood Elara's mind. They came in fractured flashes, like shards of ice, each one piercing her fragile peace. The present faded, replaced by the crushing weight of the past. The day she was outcast from her old pack. It wasn't a gradual drifting away, or a quiet departure. It was an expulsion, brutal and public, etched into her soul with the searing heat of shame. She had been so young, barely old enough to understand the nuances of pack law, let alone the terrifying implications of her own burgeoning power. It had happened during a minor dispute, a petty squabble over hunting grounds between two younger wolves. Elara, caught in the middle, had felt a surge of raw emotion, frustration, anger, a desperate need to make them stop. And then it had happened. The silver flame. It had manifested too early, too powerfully, erupting from her hands, not as a controlled burst, but as a wild, untamed inferno. It hadn't been fire, not truly, but a shimmering, ethereal energy that scorched the earth around her, leaving a smoking, silver-tinged crater where lush grass had once grown. The air had crackled, smelling of ozone and something ancient, something otherworldly. The two squabbling wolves had stopped, their eyes wide with terror, not at each other, but at her. The fear in their eyes. That was what she remembered most vividly. It wasn't just surprise, it was raw, primal terror. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of something they couldn't control, couldn't categorize. The accusations had followed swiftly, a torrent of harsh words that had felt like physical blows. Abomination, child of destruction, a threat to our fragile peace. The elders, rigid and steeped in ancient superstitions, their faces etched with lines of fear and condemnation, had deemed her an anomaly, a blight upon their sacred bloodline. Their pronouncements had been cold, unfeeling, delivered with the weight of centuries of tradition. They had twisted ancient prophecies, whispering of a cursed flame that would bring ruin upon them all. And her own family, that was the deepest cut. Her mother, her father, the siblings she had played with, shared secrets with, they had turned away. Not with anger, but with a chilling mixture of shame and fear that had overridden their love. Their eyes, once warm and familiar, had become distant, shadowed with unspoken judgment. They had stood by, silent, as the elders condemned her, as the pack shunned her. The ache of being rejected by your own kin, of being an outsider in your own skin, was a wound that festered far deeper than any physical injury. It was a loneliness that permeated her very being, a constant, gnawing emptiness that no amount of running could fill. She was an outcast, not just from a pack, but from the very concept of belonging. She remembered the solitude that had followed, a constant, suffocating companion. Years spent living on the fringes, always moving, always hiding. Every rustle in the leaves, every distant howl had sent a jolt of fear through her. She had learned to survive, to hunt, to blend in, to become a ghost in the wilderness. But survival was not living, it was merely existing. And through it all, the constant, exhausting struggle to suppress her volatile power. It was like a wild animal caged within her, clawing to get out, threatening to consume her from the inside. Sometimes, in moments of extreme stress or emotion, it would flare, a terrifying, beautiful burst of silver light that she couldn't control. She'd seen what it could do, the raw, destructive potential that lurked beneath the surface. It wasn't just a flame, it was a connection to something ancient and pure, a heritage denied, a lineage they had tried to erase. It was a power that felt both alien and intrinsically her, a part of her soul that refused to be extinguished. She had tried to understand it, to harness it, but it felt too vast, too untamed. It was her curse, the reason for her pain, her loneliness, her exile. But slowly, painstakingly, through years of desperate survival, a new thought had begun to take root. This power, this terrifying gift, might also be her only true weapon. It might be the key to her survival, to her freedom, to reclaiming a life that had been stolen from her. The idea was a fragile seed of hope, buried deep beneath layers of fear and despair, but it was there, a faint flicker in the darkness. Kaelen, meanwhile, continued to watch her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Yet he said little. He simply was. His quiet strength filled the cave, a solid, unwavering presence that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to chip away at her defenses. He didn't press her for answers, didn't demand explanations. He didn't judge her with his eyes, as so many others had. He just observed, his golden gaze deep and ancient, as if he saw not just her pain, but the echoes of centuries within her. It was unnerving, this silent scrutiny, but also strangely comforting. There was no pretense with him, no false sympathy, just an unwavering, watchful presence. When she flinched from a sudden, sharp crack of ice outside the cave, a sound that sent a jolt of primal fear through her, Kaelen moved. Not quickly, not with alarm, but with a deliberate, calming slowness. He simply placed a large, warm hand on her arm, his fingers firm but gentle. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not yet. It was a gesture of silent reassurance, a grounding touch that sent a jolt through her, not of pain, but of something akin to surprise, a deep, unexpected comfort. After years of being untouchable, of being anathema, this simple contact was monumental. It was a silent acknowledgement of her fear, a promise of protection without words. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes, slowly eroding the walls she had built around her heart, brick by painful brick. The tension in her shoulders, which she hadn't realized was there, began to ease. The raw, exposed nerves that had hummed with constant anxiety started to quiet. She found herself relaxing, just a fraction, leaning almost imperceptibly into the warmth of his hand. It was a dangerous thing, this nascent trust, this fragile connection forming in the heart of a hidden cave. She was a creature of instinct, honed by years of survival, and every instinct told her to be wary. But something about Kaelen, about his quiet strength and his profound lack of judgment, disarmed her in a way no one ever had. Exhausted, disarmed by his unexpected non-judgment, and feeling the fragile tendrils of a nascent trust, Elara found herself murmuring about her curse. The words spilled out, hesitant at first, then gaining a quiet momentum. It's a silver flame," she whispered, her voice raw, barely audible above the faint hiss of the geothermal vents. "I can't control it. It just erupts. It's why they cast me out. They said it would destroy everything." The shame, the fear, the isolation of years poured into those few words, a confession she had never dared to utter to another living soul. Kaelen's eyes, those molten gold pools, darkened slightly. It wasn't a look of fear or disgust or even surprise. It was a hint of something akin to understanding, or perhaps a shared burden, flickering within their depths. He didn't dismiss her words, didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her she was wrong or that it wasn't a curse. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. It was a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes, a profound acceptance of her truth, her pain, her terrifying gift. In that moment, in that hidden cave, surrounded by the raw power of the earth and the quiet presence of this mysterious alpha, Elara felt a tiny, fragile spark of hope ignite within her. It was the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't as alone as she thought, and that maybe, just maybe, this curse was something more, something different, something that could be understood, even embraced. Days bled into a week within the hidden cave, a sanctuary carved by the earth's own warmth. Elara's body, battered and bruised, slowly began to knit itself back together. The makeshift poultice Kaelen had applied, a concoction of mountain herbs and ancient knowledge, worked its quiet magic, drawing out the infection and soothing the raw agony of her side. Each morning, she felt a fraction stronger, the deep ache in her bones lessening, the tremor in her limbs subsiding. Yet even as her physical wounds healed, her mind remained a landscape of emotional scars, the terror of the chase, the crushing weight of her pack's rejection, the bewildering appearance of Kaelen. It all swirled within her, a chaotic maelstrom of fear and unanswered questions. She was wary, still, every instinct screaming for caution. This man, this alpha, was a mystery wrapped in shadows, his motives as unreadable as the ancient rock formations around them. But his quiet presence, his unwavering gaze, had begun to carve a fragile space of trust within her, a tiny flicker of warmth against the pervasive cold of her loneliness. He spoke little, Kaelen did, but his actions were a language all their own. He hunted, returning with fresh kills, which he cooked over the geothermal vents, the scent of roasting meat filling the cave. He watched her eat, his golden eyes observing, assessing, but never judging. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply was, a solid, unyielding presence that slowly, subtly began to ground her. She found herself watching him too, captivated by the effortless power in his movements, the ancient wisdom that seemed to reside in his very bones. There was a raw, untamed quality to him, a wildness that resonated deep within her own suppressed spirit. He was a creature of the wilderness, just like her, but unlike her, he seemed to command it, to be an integral part of its untamed heart. One morning, as the last remnants of the blizzard faded outside, leaving behind a world of pristine, glittering white, Kaelen rose from his silent vigil. He didn't ask, he simply stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very cave walls. We journey deeper into the mountains, to the sacred heart of the timberland. Elara felt a jolt of apprehension, a tightening in her chest. Deeper, into the unknown. Her first instinct was to resist, to cling to the fragile security of this hidden cave. But then, an inexplicable pull, a magnetic force she couldn't name, tugged at her soul. It was a whisper, a faint echo of the silver flame within her, urging her forward, promising something profound. The landscape transformed with every mile they traversed. The harsh, desolate snows of the higher peaks slowly gave way to an ancient, primeval forest, a world untouched by the passage of time. Here the trees grew impossibly tall, their ancient trunks gnarled and twisted, reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. Their bark was thick with moss, their branches heavy with centuries of snow, yet they exuded a vibrant, living energy. Elara felt it in the air, a hum of unseen power, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated beneath her feet. It was the breath of the earth, the pulse of magic, a sensation she had never experienced with such clarity. The forest floor was a tapestry of damp earth, decaying leaves, and ancient roots that snaked across the ground like sleeping serpents. The light shifted constantly, dappled and ethereal, filtering through the dense canopy in shimmering shafts of emerald and gold. It was a place of profound silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the ancient boughs, the distant cry of an unseen hawk, and the soft crunch of their boots on the frozen earth. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every moss-covered stone whispered forgotten names. Elara felt a strange sense of reverence, a humbling awe in the face of such ancient, untouched grandeur. This wasn't just a forest. It was a living, breathing entity, a repository of forgotten lore. The journey was arduous, testing her newly healed body. The ascent was steep in places, the terrain treacherous. Her muscles, still recovering, screamed in protest, but she pushed through, driven by that inexplicable pull, that quiet, insistent hum within her. Kaelen guided her, his presence a constant, unwavering force. He never looked back to check on her, never offered a hand unless she truly faltered, but he always seemed to know her limits, adjusting his pace, finding the easiest paths, his silent vigilance a testament to his deep knowledge of the wild and perhaps of her. His unwavering presence was a strange comfort, a silent promise that she wouldn't be left behind, that he wouldn't abandon her to the wilderness. He was a guide, a protector, and a mystery she was increasingly desperate to unravel. As they delved deeper, the air grew thick with anticipation, a palpable sense of approaching something sacred. The trees seemed to grow even taller, their branches intertwining to form a natural cathedral. The light became softer, imbued with a strange silvery luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very air. And then they arrived. It was a hidden grove, a breathtaking natural amphitheater formed by colossal gnarled trees, whose ancient roots plunged deep into the earth, creating a sacred circle. In the very center, bathed in that ethereal silver light, stood a moss-covered stone altar. It wasn't ornate, not carved with intricate designs, but its simplicity only added to its profound power. It pulsed, Elara realized, with a faint, steady silver light, a heartbeat of pure energy. As she approached, drawn by an irresistible force, the light intensified, growing brighter, warmer, enveloping her in its gentle glow. Ethereal whispers seemed to emanate from the very air, a soft murmuring chorus that was just beyond the grasp of her conscious mind. It wasn't a language she understood, but it was a sound that resonated deep within her soul, a forgotten melody. It felt like the collective breath of centuries, the quiet voices of those who had stood here before, their hopes and fears imprinted on the very fabric of the place. She felt a profound connection to the grove, a sense of belonging she'd never known, a feeling of coming home to a place she had never seen. It was as if every atom in her body recognized this sacred ground, as if she had been destined to stand here now, in this moment. Awe washed over her, a humbling, overwhelming wave that brought tears to her eyes. This wasn't just a beautiful place, it was alive, pulsating with magic, a palpable force that hummed against her skin, a whisper of ancient power that promised to reveal forgotten truths. With trembling steps, Elara reached out, her hand drawn by an invisible thread to the moss-covered altar. The moment her fingertips brushed its cool, rough surface, an overwhelming surge of energy coursed through her. It wasn't painful, but intensely powerful, like a lightning bolt striking her very core, yet instead of burning, it ignited something deep within her. Her breath hitched, her body stiffened, and then the visions began. They weren't just images, they were immersive, visceral experiences flashing before her eyes with blinding speed and clarity. She saw ancient wolves, their forms majestic and powerful, their fur shimmering with the same silver luminescence that now pulsed around her. Their eyes, deep and knowing, glowed with distinctive silver marks, swirling patterns that seemed to mimic the flame within her. Were these her ancestors, the true lineage of the silver flame? They moved with a grace that spoke of profound connection to the earth, their howls not of aggression, but of unity and reverence. Then, the scene shifted. A female figure, tall and regal, with hair like spun moonlight and eyes that held the wisdom of countless generations, appeared. She moved with an ethereal grace, her hands outstretched, wielding a flame that was unmistakably hers, the silver flame. But this flame didn't destroy, it purified. It swept over shadowy, corrupted forms, dissolving them into shimmering dust, leaving behind only light and clarity. It was a power of cleansing, of restoration, not of destruction. Elara felt a profound sense of recognition, a deep, aching familiarity with this woman, as if she were looking at a reflection of her own potential, a glimpse into the true nature of her gift. The visions spiraled, showing glimpses of a future shrouded in both glory and destruction. She saw crumbling cities, swallowed by encroaching darkness, then new growth, vibrant and resilient, rising from the ashes. She witnessed a great battle, a clash of light and shadow, where the silver flame blazed as a beacon against overwhelming odds. But it wasn't just chaos, there was a sense of purpose, of destiny unfolding. She heard fragments of a prophecy, ancient words echoing in her mind, resonating with a power that vibrated through her very bones. The one with the mark, child of the silver flame, shall rise when the world bleeds. She will purify the shadows, and from her spirit a new dawn shall break. The words weren't a curse, they were a calling, a heavy, undeniable truth that settled deep within her. Kaelen watched, his expression unreadable, but his golden eyes burned with an intense, knowing light. He didn't move, didn't speak, simply observed her journey, as if he had known this would happen, as if he had brought her here precisely for this purpose. His quiet intensity deepened the mystery around him. How much did he know? How was he connected to this ancient prophecy, to her destiny? His presence, a silent anchor in the whirlwind of visions, made her feel both utterly exposed and strangely protected. The visions faded, leaving Elara shaken, disoriented, the weight of what she had witnessed pressing down on her. The profound realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't just a reject, a cursed outcast. She was a piece of a larger puzzle, a chosen one, tied to an ancient prophecy that spoke of world-changing events. The burden of such a destiny felt overwhelming, crushing. How could she, the girl who couldn't even control her own power, who had been cast out by her own kind, who felt broken and inadequate, be the key to anything so monumental? Her mind reeled, grappling with the immensity of it all. It was too much, too grand, too terrifying. A wave of profound inadequacy washed over her. She remembered the fear in her old pack's eyes, the accusations that had branded her a monster. How could she be the one to purify shadows when she couldn't even purify her own past? Her voice, raw with fear and inadequacy, trembled as she finally spoke, the words torn from her. "I'm not strong enough," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the ancient altar, not daring to meet Kaelen's eyes. "I'm broken. How can I be the one with the mark? I can barely control this thing inside me." The vulnerability in her voice was absolute, a raw exposure of her deepest fears. She was terrified, not just of the prophecy, but of failing it, of failing herself, of failing the world that now, apparently, depended on her. Kaelen stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, not menacingly, but like a comforting cloak. He knelt beside her, his large hand reaching out, his touch surprisingly steadying as he placed it gently on her shoulder. It was a grounding force, an anchor in the storm of her internal conflict. His golden eyes, deep and ancient, pierced through her fear, seeing beyond her self-doubt, into the raw potential that simmered within her. "Broken," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her very soul. Or simply unfinished. The words hung in the air, profound and challenging. They weren't a dismissal of her pain, but a reframe, a gentle push towards a different perspective. He wasn't denying her past, but suggesting it was merely a stage, not the end. He shifted his hand, his thumb gently caressing her arm. "The flame does not seek control, Elara," he continued, his voice soft but firm. "It seeks freedom. It is not something to be caged, but something to be understood, to be unleashed." His words were a revelation, a complete inversion of everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about her power. Control had been her constant struggle, her greatest fear. But freedom? That was a terrifying, exhilarating concept. His gaze intensified, holding hers, demanding she believe him. You are not just a child of the flame, you are the flame itself, and it is not cursed. It is the beginning of something new, a new era, a new balance. The weight of these words was immense, a profound shift in her understanding of herself, of her destiny. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about something far, far greater. Kaelen's knowledge, his unwavering conviction, hinted at a deeper connection to the prophecy, to her, that she couldn't yet grasp. How did he know this? What was his role in this ancient story? The mystery surrounding him deepened, even as her trust in him solidified, a strange, undeniable bond forming between them, forged in the crucible of prophecy and shared secrets. She was no longer just a hunted outcast. She was a chosen one, standing on the precipice of a destiny she never asked for, guided by a man who held the keys to a world she was only just beginning to comprehend. The profound revelations at the Sacred Heart had left Elara vibrating with a mixture of awe and terror. Kaelen's quiet conviction, his unwavering belief in her true purpose, had been a balm to her wounded soul, a fragile anchor in the whirlwind of newfound destiny. For a brief, precious time, the ancient grove had felt like a sanctuary, a place where the crushing weight of her past could finally begin to lift. The air, once humming with mystical energy, now seemed to hold a promise of a future, however uncertain, where her power might be a blessing, not a curse. They stood together, two solitary figures touched by prophecy, their bond deepening with every shared glance, every unspoken understanding. A fragile peace settled over the ancient trees, a quiet breath before the storm. But peace, Elara knew, was a fleeting illusion in a world that had always sought to break her. The sanctuary of the Sacred Heart was suddenly, brutally shattered. It began subtly, a shift in the very fabric of the air. The gentle, ethereal glow that had permeated the grove flickered, then dimmed, replaced by an oppressive chill that seeped into her bones, colder than any blizzard. It wasn't the clean, sharp cold of the mountains, but a damp, clinging chill that spoke of decay, of something unnatural and insidious. A chilling wind, not of nature's making, swept through the ancient grove, carrying with it a scent that made Elara's stomach clench, the metallic tang of old blood, the sickly sweet odor of corruption, and something else, something ancient and malevolent, the unmistakable stench of dark magic. Kaelen stiffened beside her, his body tensing, every muscle coiled, his golden eyes narrowing, scanning the dense ancient forest around them. His hand instinctively went to her arm, a protective grip that spoke volumes. The hum of unseen energy that had filled the grove now twisted, becoming a discordant thrum, a low, guttural vibration that resonated deep in Elara's chest. This wasn't the pack that had hunted her, the one she knew, the one driven by fear and prejudice. This was something far older, far more sinister. This was a different kind of hunger. Then they began to emerge. Not from the shadows, but as shadows. Gaunt, unnaturally fast figures, their movements jerky and disjointed, slithered from the deeper parts of the forest. They weren't wolves, not truly. Their forms were vaguely lupine, but twisted, elongated, their fur matted and dull, their bodies skeletal. Their eyes, oh, their eyes were the worst. They burned with a malevolent, unnatural light, a sickly green or a dead, cold blue, utterly devoid of life or soul. These were corrupted shifters, creatures twisted by a dark force, their very existence a blasphemy against the natural order. They moved with a horrifying silence, their paws barely disturbing the fallen leaves, their presence a cold, creeping dread that made the ancient trees themselves seem to shudder. Elara felt a primal scream building in her throat, choked by terror. This was beyond anything she had ever faced. Her previous pursuers, for all their cruelty, had been wolves, driven by the flawed logic of their fear. These things were pure malice, an emptiness that sought to consume. The sacredness of the grove, the profound connection she had felt, seemed to mock her now, leaving her feeling utterly vulnerable, exposed in a place that should have offered ultimate protection. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm against the encroaching darkness. A cold sweat broke out on her skin, despite the chill, as she realized the true depth of the threat. This wasn't just about her survival anymore, it was about the very soul of the forest, the very essence of shifter kind. Kaelen didn't hesitate. The moment the first corrupted shifter broke through the tree line, he moved with the speed of a lightning strike, his human form blurred, muscles rippling, bones shifting with a sickening yet powerful crack. In a blink he was gone, replaced by his massive, terrifying wolf form. His fur, the color of obsidian, seemed to absorb the encroaching shadows, making him a formidable living shield between Elara and the encroaching horrors. His eyes, molten gold even in this form, blazed with a fierce protective fury. He was a creature of raw, untamed power, a force of nature unleashed. He fought with a brutal efficiency, a primal dance of death. His massive jaws snapped, tearing through the corrupted flesh of the shadow creatures. His claws, as sharp as obsidian blades, raked through their gaunt forms, sending them dissolving into wisps of dark smoke. Each strike was precise, devastating, a testament to his centuries of experience in battle. He moved like a dark whirlwind, a blur of fur and muscle, a protector of unmatched ferocity. But the sheer numbers of the corrupted creatures were overwhelming. They swarmed him, relentless, their malevolent eyes fixed on Elara, as if she were their ultimate prize. They were like a tide of darkness, pushing him back, slowly, inexorably towards the sacred altar where Elara stood, frozen in a mixture of awe and terror. Elara watched, helpless, as Kaelen fought, his powerful body absorbing blow after blow, his snarls echoing through the grove. She wanted to help, to unleash the silver flame, but the terror held her captive, paralyzing her. She was a liability, a burden, and the realization was a bitter pill. As Kaelen fended off a particularly vicious assault, pushing back a wave of the corrupted shifters, a voice, ancient and raspy, echoed through the grove. It wasn't a physical voice, but a disembodied whisper that seemed to emanate from the very air, from the depths of the earth itself. It was chilling, malevolent, and utterly devoid of warmth. "The child of the flame pollutes this land," it hissed, the words slithering into Elara's mind like venom. "She brings ruin. Choose, Alpha, your people, or the prophecy's plague." The voice was a direct challenge, a chilling warning that cut through the chaos of battle. It wasn't just a threat to Elara, it was a threat to Kaelen, to his loyalty, to his very identity as an Alpha. The personal threat that had haunted Elara for so long suddenly expanded, becoming communal, ideological. Her existence, her power, was being used as a weapon against Kaelen, a wedge driven between him and his responsibilities. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for allegiance, for truth, for the very soul of their world. The voice implied a choice, a terrible, impossible choice, and Elara's heart clenched with a fresh wave of fear, not for herself, but for Kaelen, for the burden she had inadvertently placed upon him. Just as Kaelen was pushed to his limits, a new group emerged, not corrupted, not shadowy beasts, but a pack of wolves. They burst through the tree line, their forms powerful and familiar, their fur gleaming in the dim, unnatural light. At their head was a stern silver-furred alpha, his presence radiating an aura of rigid authority and unwavering adherence to ancient laws. This was Rorik, a name Elara had heard whispered in hushed tones, even in her old pack, a figure known for his unbending principles and his fierce protection of tradition. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the chaotic scene, then fixed on Elara with an immediate chilling suspicion. He saw her not as a victim, not as a potential ally, but as a danger, a chaotic force that threatened the delicate balance of their world. He and his wolves moved with practiced precision, forming a defensive perimeter, but their gaze was fixed on Elara, not on the corrupted shifters. Their snarls were directed at her, their bodies tensed in a posture of condemnation. She must be purged, Rorik barked, his voice booming through the grove, cutting through the sounds of battle, resonating with the weight of generations of fear and prejudice. Her power will tear us apart. She is an abomination, a blight upon our kind. The injustice of it all burned hotter than the silver flame within Elara. She had just witnessed Kaelen fighting to protect her, fighting against a true malevolent darkness, and yet these wolves, her own kind, saw her as the enemy. The anger flared, hot and potent, mingling with the bitter taste of betrayal. She wanted to lash out, to unleash the power within her, to prove them wrong, to burn away their ignorance and their fear. The silver flame thrummed beneath her skin, eager to obey, to defend her against this baseless condemnation. But a deeper part of her, the part that had learned caution through years of pain, held back. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that any display of her power now, however justified, would only confirm their worst suspicions, would only solidify their accusations. It was a cruel, impossible paradox. Rorik, his eyes blazing with righteous fury, approached Kaelen, who had momentarily pushed back the corrupted shifters, his gaze now locked on the new threat. "Choose, Kaelen," Rorik snarled, his voice low and menacing, yet carrying across the strained silence that had fallen over the grove. "Your legacy, your pack, the very future of our people, or this aberration. She brings only chaos, only destruction. She is a plague upon our kind." The words hung heavy in the air, a terrible ultimatum. Elara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, a sickening lurch of dread twisting in her stomach. The weight of centuries of tradition, the burden of Kaelen's alpha responsibilities, the survival of his people, all of it rested on his shoulders. He was being forced to choose, not between good and evil, but between duty and a burgeoning, dangerous love. It was an impossible position, a cruel twist of fate that threatened to tear him apart. Kaelen hesitated. For a heart-stopping moment, his face was a mask of profound conflict, a flicker of torment crossing his features. His golden eyes, usually so resolute, now held a deep, agonizing indecision. He looked from Rorik, the embodiment of ancient law and expectation, to Elara, the embodiment of prophecy and untamed power, the woman who was slowly, irrevocably, claiming a place in his guarded heart. The silence from the other wolves was deafening, a collective holding of breath, waiting for his decision. Elara felt a wave of profound agony, a cold dread that she was about to be abandoned again, that the man who had saved her, the man who had seen her true self, would be forced to turn his back on her. The thought was a searing pain, worse than any physical wound. She couldn't bear to see him torn, couldn't bear to be the cause of his undoing. The tension was unbearable. A taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Elara, seeing Kaelen's impossible position, the raw torment etched on his face, knew she had to act. She wouldn't be his burden. She wouldn't be the reason he lost everything. With a heartbroken whisper that was barely audible even to herself, she looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding, for forgiveness. Then her gaze shifted to Rorik and the condemning faces of his pack, their eyes filled with fear and judgment. A fierce resolve hardened her features, pushing past the pain and the fear. "I won't be your burden," she said, her voice trembling, but gaining a quiet, unyielding resolve that surprised even herself. "I'll face this on my own." It was a choice born of love and desperation, a sacrifice to protect the man who had, against all odds, chosen to see her. She turned, her body still aching, her heart bleeding, but her spirit hardening. As she moved, a fresh surge of the silver flame flared around her injured hand, a defiant, almost conscious act of power. It wasn't a destructive burst, but a shimmering shield, a declaration of intent. She plunged back into the darkened forest, not in defeat, but with a fierce, burning vow. She would fight, not just for her survival, not just for her freedom, but for her right to exist, for the truth of her power, and for the chance to prove them all wrong. Kaelen's agonized roar echoed behind her, a sound of raw pain and desperate regret, but Elara didn't look back. Her path, however solitary, was now clear. She would face the world, and its judgment, alone. The forest swallowed Elara whole. She ran, not with the frantic desperation of a hunted animal, but with a raw, burning hurt fueling her every stride. Kaelen's roar, a sound of agony and regret, echoed behind her, a haunting symphony that pierced deeper than any physical wound. The condemnation of Rorik's pack, their eyes filled with fear and judgment, had been a fresh lash, reopening old wounds of rejection and betrayal. But it was Kaelen's hesitation, that split second of agonizing indecision, that truly twisted the knife in her heart. She had seen the conflict on his face, the impossible choice he was forced to make, and in that moment, her own desperate love for him had compelled her to flee, to spare him the burden she felt she was. She wouldn't be his weakness, his downfall. She would face her destiny alone, as she always had. The wilderness became her only companion, a cold, indifferent mirror to her soul. She sought refuge in the deepest, most secluded parts of the forest, places so remote that even the most seasoned hunters rarely ventured there. The trees here were ancient, their branches heavy with silence, their roots twisting into the earth like old, gnarled bones. The air was thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, a stark, wild beauty that mirrored the untamed spirit she carried within her. She found a small, hidden alcove beneath a massive, snow-laden fir, its drooping branches providing a meager shelter from the relentless cold. Her body ached, a symphony of protest from the fresh exertion. The wound in her side, though healing, throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, a constant reminder of the chaos she had escaped. With what little knowledge she possessed, gleaned from years of solitary survival, she tended to it. She chewed on bitter herbs, pressing the pungent paste to the angry gash, hoping to ward off infection. She tore strips from her already tattered clothes to bind it, her fingers clumsy with cold and exhaustion. Each movement was a deliberate act of will, a battle against the encroaching weakness. The loneliness was a heavy cloak, wrapping around her, suffocating her. It was a familiar companion, one she had known since her exile, but tonight it felt heavier, colder, tinged with the bitter taste of a hope she had dared to nurture, only to see it shattered. She thought of Kaelen, of his golden eyes, of the unexpected warmth of his hand on her arm in the cave. A fragile bond had begun to form, a connection she hadn't realized how desperately she craved, and now it felt severed, leaving an aching void. She curled into herself, shivering, the cold seeping into her bones, or perhaps it was the chill of profound isolation. But as the days bled into nights, and Elara continued her solitary, arduous journey, a strange awareness began to prickle at the edges of her consciousness. She wasn't truly alone, not entirely. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. A fresh kill, a plump rabbit or a swift deer, would sometimes appear near her makeshift camp, left with no discernible trace of its provider. A broken branch, snapped cleanly, would indicate a path recently taken, a direction that seemed to parallel her own. The snow, pristine and undisturbed for miles, would occasionally bear the faint, unmistakable imprint of a large wolf's paw, always a respectful distance away, never intrusive, never threatening. It was Kaelen. He was shadowing her. His presence was a silent vigil, a promise unspoken, a constant, unwavering shadow that followed her through the desolate wilderness. He never intruded, never showed himself, but the subtle signs of his presence were everywhere. It was a strange comfort, a silent defiance of the pack's condemnation, a quiet affirmation that she wasn't abandoned, not truly. It was a promise, whispered on the wind, that he hadn't given up on her, even when she had given up on herself. This silent pursuit was more potent than any words, a testament to a bond that refused to be broken, even by the weight of pack law and ancient prejudice. The stark beauty of the isolated wilderness, with its towering pines and silent snows, now seemed to mirror not just her solitude, but also the quiet, unwavering devotion of the Alpha who refused to let her vanish. One freezing night, as the temperature plummeted, and the wind howled, a mournful tune through the barren branches, Elara shivered by a meager fire. It was a small, struggling flame, barely enough to keep the worst of the cold at bay, but it was all she could manage. Her body was racked with shivers, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. She huddled closer to the flickering embers, drawing her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth she had left. The loneliness pressed in on her, a suffocating weight in the vast, silent wilderness. Then, a shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness beyond the firelight. Kaelen. He finally stepped into the light, his massive form silhouetted against the meager flames. He didn't offer an apology for his hesitation, for the agonizing choice he had been forced to make. There were no words of comfort, no explanations. He simply moved with that quiet, powerful grace, settling himself opposite her, his golden eyes unwavering, fixed on her with an intensity that saw through her exhaustion, through her pain, straight into the raw vulnerability of her soul. He carried a piece of dried meat, tough but nourishing. Without a word, he tore a portion off and offered it to her. It was a primal, intimate act, a shared communion in the heart of the wild. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the meager fire, the soft tearing of meat, and the distant, mournful sigh of the wind. There was no need for words. The unspoken communication between them was more potent, more profound than any conversation could have been. His presence, his quiet strength, the shared warmth of the fire, slowly began to thaw the emotional ice around her heart. The scent of wood smoke and damp earth mingled with his unique ozone-like scent, creating a strange, comforting aroma that filled the small space. The warmth from the fire, radiating from his body, began to spread through Elara's chilled limbs, a physical sensation that mirrored the slow, fragile thawing within her spirit. As the fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, Kaelen finally broke the silence. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very earth, yet it was imbued with a surprising vulnerability. He didn't start with grand declarations or explanations of his actions. He began, slowly, tentatively, to reveal himself, peeling back the layers of his formidable alpha facade. He spoke of his own history of solitude, a life lived under the immense burden of his alpha lineage. He wasn't just a leader, he was a living conduit of ancient power, bound by traditions and expectations that stretched back centuries. He spoke of the relentless pressures he faced from an ancient council, a shadowy, powerful entity that dictated his every move, his every decision, binding him to a path he hadn't chosen but was forced to uphold. He spoke of a devastating past loss, a betrayal that had left him guarded, hardened, his heart encased in a shell of ice. It wasn't a casual mention, it was a raw, aching wound, still fresh despite the passage of time. He didn't give details, not yet, but the pain in his voice, the flicker of profound sorrow in his golden eyes, spoke volumes. It was a wound that had shaped him, made him cautious, made him fear the very things he now sought to protect. He admitted his hesitation at the Sacred Heart. That agonizing moment of indecision was born not of doubt in her, not of a lack of belief in her power, but of a deep-seated, crippling fear of history repeating itself. "I've seen power destroy," he confessed, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable, raw with the echoes of past pain. "I've seen prophecy twisted, used as a weapon. I couldn't bear to see you lost too, to see that fire, that pure wild thing inside you, consumed by the same darkness that took everything from me." His confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken grief. He wasn't just a powerful alpha, he was a man scarred by loss, haunted by the past, burdened by a legacy that threatened to consume him. This unexpected vulnerability, this raw exposure of his own hidden pain and inner struggles, chipped away at Elara's remaining defenses. She saw him not just as a savior or a mysterious figure, but as a kindred spirit, someone who understood the crushing weight of a destiny unasked for, the agony of loss, the fear of one's own power. It was a moment of profound empathy, a bridge forged between two deeply wounded souls. Disarmed by his honesty, by the raw vulnerability he had shown, Elara found herself reciprocating. The words, once locked away in the darkest corners of her mind, now tumbled out, hesitant at first, then gaining a quiet momentum. She revealed the true terrifying extent of her power, not just the silver flame itself, but the chaotic, destructive force it could become when uncontrolled. She spoke of the times it had almost consumed her, moments where the raw energy had threatened to tear her apart from the inside out, leaving her trembling and terrified. She confessed the deep-seated fear that she was indeed a monster, a creature of chaos destined to bring ruin wherever she went. Then she spoke of her most devastating secret, the trauma that had haunted her every waking moment, the guilt that gnawed at her soul. It was a memory she had buried deep, a wound that had never truly healed. She described a moment years ago when her uncontrolled power, a sudden blinding surge of the silver flame, had caused harm to someone she loved. Not intentionally, never intentionally, but the consequence had been devastating. The details were raw, visceral, painting a picture of accidental destruction, of a beloved face contorted in pain, of a life irrevocably altered by her untamed gift. The memory brought fresh tears to her eyes, hot and stinging, tracing paths down her cold cheeks. "How can you trust me?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, raw with the agony of that memory, "when I can't even trust myself?" The question hung in the air, heavy with her pain, her self-loathing. It was the core of her vulnerability, the deepest fear she harbored, that she was inherently flawed, inherently dangerous, unworthy of love or trust. Her confession, so raw and unfiltered, created a profound intimacy between them, shared dark secrets, revealed in the quiet intimacy of the cave, wove a bond far stronger than any words, any promises. It was a connection forged in the crucible of vulnerability, a profound understanding that transcended the physical. Kaelen didn't answer immediately. He simply reached across the flickering fire, his large hand surprisingly gentle, cupping her face. His thumb brushed away a tear that traced a path down her cheek, his touch sending a jolt through her, a warmth that spread through her entire body. Their eyes locked, golden meeting hazel, a silent conversation passing between them, a profound understanding that needed no words. The unspoken question hung in the air, palpable, electric. The distance between them seemed to shrink, the flickering firelight illuminating the raw emotion on their faces. Their breaths mingled, warm and soft in the cold air, as their faces drew closer, closer. Just as their lips were about to meet, just as the fragile bubble of intimacy threatened to burst into something more, a distant ominous howl ripped through the silence. It wasn't the sound of a lone wolf, or even a hunting pack. It was a long, drawn-out wail, filled with a chilling blend of warning and despair, a sound that spoke of ancient threats and encroaching darkness. It was a stark, brutal reminder of the world outside, the world they had momentarily forgotten, the world that was still very much at war. Kaelen pulled back, his eyes still locked on hers, the intensity in their depths undimmed, but now laced with a renewed urgency. The moment was shattered, the fragile intimacy broken by the harsh reality of their circumstances. He didn't speak of the howl, didn't explain its meaning. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Their world was still in peril. But even as he pulled away, his gaze never left hers, his hand still gently cupping her face. "I see you, Elara," he said, his voice a low, fierce vow that resonated with absolute conviction. It wasn't a whisper, it was a promise, a declaration. "All of you, the flame and the fear, the strength and the scars, and I choose you." The words were a powerful affirmation, a complete acceptance of her whole self, the light and the shadow, the gift and the curse. It was a vow that transcended the immediate danger, a promise of unwavering loyalty in a world that had always betrayed her. In that moment, despite the ominous howl, despite the shattered intimacy, Elara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that she was not alone. And for the first time in a very long time, a fragile yet potent hope began to bloom in her heart. The ominous howl that had pierced the quiet intimacy of the cave had been a stark reminder of the world outside, a world still reeling from unseen threats. But Kaelen's words, his fierce vow, "I see you, Elara, all of you, the flame and the fear, and I choose you," had been a powerful counterpoint, a shield against the encroaching darkness. Their bond, forged in shared vulnerability and the crucible of prophecy, felt stronger than any mountain, more resilient than any storm. With a fragile yet potent hope blooming in her heart, Elara had agreed to return with Kaelen to his territory, to face the world, not alone, but together. The journey back was different from her desperate flight. There was a sense of purpose now, a quiet determination. Kaelen moved with a renewed resolve, his presence a constant, reassuring anchor. As they approached the edge of his lands, the landscape shifted from the wild, untamed peaks to the more settled, yet still ancient, forests that housed his pack. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of many wolves, a blend of familiar and foreign aromas that made Elara's instincts prickle with a mixture of apprehension and a strange tentative longing for belonging. They were met, not with open arms, but with cautious curiosity. A few loyal members of Kaelen's inner circle, their faces etched with worry and the strain of recent events, greeted them. Their gazes lingered on Elara, a mixture of suspicion and a dawning, hesitant respect. They had heard whispers, of course, of the outcast, of the silver flame, of the alpha's impossible choice. But Kaelen's unwavering presence beside her, his silent, unyielding support, seemed to quell their immediate fears. He didn't introduce her with grand pronouncements, but with a quiet authority that left no room for argument. "She is with me," was all he said, and for now, that was enough. There was a brief, fragile period of peace, a deceptive calm before the inevitable storm. Elara found herself settling into a routine, however temporary. She helped where she could, her movements still cautious, her eyes constantly scanning for judgment, for the familiar signs of fear. But among Kaelen's inner circle, there was a tentative acceptance, a quiet curiosity that slowly began to chip away at her ingrained wariness. She saw the way their pups, unafraid and innocent, would sometimes approach her, their eyes wide with wonder, drawn to the subtle shimmer of her power that she now tried less desperately to hide. In those fleeting moments, watching the playful antics of the young, or sharing a quiet meal by a communal fire, Elara allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't constantly running, constantly hiding, a future where she truly belonged, where her power wasn't a curse, but a part of her, accepted, perhaps even valued. She and Kaelen spent quiet hours together, away from the watchful eyes of the pack. They walked through ancient groves, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. He would tell her stories of his lineage, of the sacred duties of his alpha bloodline, of the history of his people. She, in turn, found herself sharing more of her own past, the small joys before her exile, the crushing weight of her family's betrayal. The romantic tension between them, once a crackle of electricity, had deepened into a profound, aching tenderness. He would sometimes reach for her hand, his touch a silent promise, his golden eyes reflecting a future she had never dared to dream of. It was a fragile hope, a precious, vulnerable thing, but it was theirs. This brief respite, this imagining of a shared future, was meant to make the inevitable betrayal sting all the more. The call for the formal gathering came swiftly, cutting through their fragile peace like a blade. It was a summons to the Grand Council Hall, a massive, ancient structure carved from the heart of the mountain, where the alphas and elders of the allied packs would convene. The stated purpose was to discuss the rising threat of the shadow beasts, the insidious creatures that had attacked them at the Sacred Heart. But a cold dread settled in Elara's stomach. She knew instinctively that this meeting was about more than just strategy. It was about her. The hall was vast, echoing, filled with the hushed murmurs of powerful shifters. The air was thick with tension, a potent mixture of fear, suspicion, and anticipation. Elara stood beside Kaelen, his presence a solid comfort, but even his immense power couldn't entirely shield her from the hundreds of eyes that watched her, assessing, judging. She recognized some faces from Rorik's pack, their gazes still cold with condemnation. Others were strangers, their expressions unreadable. The proceedings began with somber reports of recent attacks by the shadow beasts. tales of ravaged lands and lost lives. The fear in the hall was palpable, a heavy cloak that settled over everyone. Then, the true architect of Elara's misery stepped forward. It wasn't Rorik, as she had half expected. It was an influential elder from Kaelen's own council, Lysander. He was a seemingly benevolent figure, his silver hair and beard lending him an air of wisdom and authority. His eyes, a pale, almost watery blue, held a gentle, reassuring calm, a stark contrast to the simmering tension in the room. He spoke with a soft, measured voice, his words flowing like a calming river. Yet beneath the surface, Elara felt a chilling undercurrent of something insidious, something profoundly wrong. Lysander began by acknowledging the rising threat, the need for unity. He spoke of ancient prophecies, of the delicate balance of their world. He painted a picture of a desperate time, a time when desperate measures were needed. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he revealed a hidden, ancient text, a scroll of weathered parchment that looked centuries old. It was bound in dark leather, its edges frayed, its surface covered in intricate arcane symbols. He held it aloft, his voice gaining a subtle, almost hypnotic power. For generations, he intoned, his gaze sweeping over the assembled alphas, our ancestors have guarded a truth, a prophecy whispered in the deepest chambers of our lore, a truth that, until now, we dared not speak aloud. As he spoke, Elara felt a prickle of unease. This felt wrong, too deliberate, too staged. Lysander unrolled the parchment, revealing ancient script and faded illustrations. He began to read, his voice low and resonant, but the words he spoke were not the ones Elara remembered from her visions at the Sacred Heart. This text, she realized with a sickening lurch of dread, had been carefully, meticulously altered. The prophecy, once a beacon of hope, was twisted, perverted into a chilling condemnation. The child of the silver flame, he read, his voice gaining a chilling emphasis, shall devour the light, her power a curse upon all shifter kind. She is the harbinger of ruin, the catalyst of our destruction. He then proceeded to present what he called irrefutable proof of Elara's destructive past actions. He spoke of the incident that had led to her exile, twisting the narrative, painting her uncontrolled burst of power, not as an accident, but as a deliberate act of malice, a sign of her inherent corruption. He presented fabricated evidence, distorted accounts from her old pack, witnesses who spoke of her reckless disregard for life, of the chaos she left in her wake. He played on the deep-seated fears of the shifters, their ancient superstitions, their inherent distrust of anything that deviated from the established order. He spoke of the shadow beasts, hinting that Elara's very presence, her cursed power, was drawing them, a magnet for destruction. Elara felt a cold fury begin to simmer beneath her skin. The shock of betrayal from within, from someone who had seemed so benevolent, was a bitter, nauseating taste in her mouth. She wanted to scream, to refute every lie, to expose his insidious manipulation, but the words caught in her throat, choked by the sheer audacity of his deception. He was a puppet master, pulling strings she hadn't even known existed, weaving a web of lies so intricate, so believable, that it threatened to ensnare everyone. The insidious nature of his manipulation, the way he played on ancient fears, on the very instinct for survival, was a chilling testament to his cunning. He wasn't just lying, he was twisting truth into a weapon, turning her own history against her, against Kaelen, against any hope she had of finding acceptance. The atmosphere in the Grand Council Hall shifted, palpably. The hushed murmurs turned into an angry buzz, then a rising chorus of murmurs and snarls. The faces of the council members, once merely curious or suspicious, now hardened into masks of fear and condemnation. Lysander's words, delivered with such calm authority, had ignited the ancient fears that lay dormant in their hearts. Accusations began to fly, a torrent of harsh words that struck Elara like physical blows. Her past rejections, the very traumas she had confessed to Kaelen in the cave, were brought to light, amplified and distorted, twisted into monstrous acts of deliberate malice. She burned our lands. She brought the sickness. She is a witch, a harbinger of death. The air became thick, suffocating, heavy with the weight of hundreds of condemning gazes. Elara felt cornered, trapped, a wild animal caught in a snare. The injustice of it all was a searing pain, hotter than any flame. She was powerless against this tide of misunderstanding, against the carefully constructed lies that painted her as a villain. The crushing weight of public condemnation, of being judged and found wanting by an entire assembly of her own kind, was almost unbearable. It was the same fear, the same hatred she had faced in her old pack, but magnified 100-fold, echoing through a grand hall, leaving her feeling utterly exposed and helpless. Then came the chilling demands. Voices rose, harsh and unyielding. Banishment, execution. She must be sacrificed. The word hung in the air, a death knell, a sacrifice to appease the ancient spirits, to prevent the full prophecy, Lysander's twisted version of it, from unfolding, to save them from her. The idea was abhorrent, a barbaric solution to a problem that was in truth a carefully orchestrated deception. Elara felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a terrifying realization that her life, her very existence, was now on the line, decided by fear and lies. The pressure on Kaelen was immense, a tangible weight that seemed to press down on him from all sides. Lysander, sensing his advantage, stepped forward, his pale eyes fixed on Kaelen, his voice dripping with insidious challenge. "Choose, Alpha," he thundered, his voice now devoid of its former calm, ringing with a chilling authority. "Your duty to your people, your sacred legacy, the survival of your pack, or your reckless attachment to this cursed creature." He gestured to Elara with a dismissive flick of his hand, as if she were nothing more than a dangerous pet. "She brings only chaos, only destruction. She is an aberration, a blight upon our kind." Kaelen's face was a mask of torment, a raw canvas of agony. His golden eyes, usually so resolute, now flickered with a profound, agonizing indecision. The weight of centuries of tradition, the expectations of his lineage, the responsibility for his people's survival, all battled against his burgeoning love for Elara, his fierce belief in her innocence, his unwavering conviction that she was the true key to their salvation. For a heart-stopping moment, he hesitated. The silence in the hall was absolute, every eye fixed on the Alpha, waiting for his decision. Elara's heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat of terror. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the impossible choice tearing him apart. Would he choose his pack, his duty, his legacy, over her? Would he abandon her, just as her family had? The possibility was a searing pain, worse than any physical wound. Then, something shifted. A flicker of fierce resolve hardened Kaelen's features, pushing past the torment. A deep, guttural growl rumbled in his chest, rising, building, until it erupted into a roar that shook the very foundations of the Grand Council Hall. It was a sound of pure, untamed alpha fury, a declaration that brooked no argument. "Enough," he thundered, his voice echoing through the vast chamber, silencing every whisper, every snarl. He stepped forward, his massive frame radiating raw power, placing himself squarely, defiantly, in front of Elara, a living shield against the condemnation of the council. His golden eyes blazed, not with indecision, but with an unwavering, absolute conviction. "She is not a sacrifice," he bellowed, his voice ringing with righteous anger. "She is our only hope, and I will stand with her." The declaration hung in the air, a defiant challenge to Lysander, to the council, to centuries of fear and prejudice. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Shocked disbelief and a dawning hesitant hope flickered across the faces of some. Kaelen, the stoic, duty-bound alpha, had chosen. He had chosen her. It was a powerful moment, a bold stand against the tide, a profound act of loyalty that brought tears to Elara's eyes. He had not abandoned her. He had chosen to fight for her, to fight with her, even against his own people. But Lysander, the puppet master, was not finished. A cruel, triumphant gleam entered his pale eyes. "Foolish Alpha," he hissed, his voice now laced with undisguised malice. then you shall fall with her." With a swift, almost imperceptible movement, he unleashed a hidden ancient artifact. It was a small, intricately carved obsidian sphere, pulsing with a faint, sickly green light. He held it aloft, and as he did, Elara felt a searing pain erupt through her body, a draining sensation that stole her breath, her strength, her very essence. The silver flame within her, which had surged with Kaelen's defiance, now flickered, threatened by this insidious drain. The artifact was designed to suppress, to consume, to extinguish her power, pushing her to the brink of collapse. Her body faltered, her knees threatening to buckle. The pain of the draining energy was immense, but it was the pain of the betrayal, the insidious, calculated cruelty of Lysander, that truly twisted her gut. He wasn't just trying to defeat her, he was trying to break her, to make her a sacrifice. The overwhelming weight of it all, the physical agony, the emotional devastation, became too much. She was pushed to the absolute edge, her vision blurring, the world spinning around her. And then, something snapped, not in defeat, but in a raw, primal surge of defiance. The silver flame, threatened with extinction, roared to life within her, not as a controlled burst, but as a raw, uncontrolled explosion of pure, untamed power. It erupted from her, a blinding, shimmering wave of silver light that incinerated the obsidian artifact in Lysander's hand, turning it to dust. The shockwaves rippled through the Grand Council Hall, shaking the very foundations of the ancient structure. It was a chaotic, terrifying display of her power, a raw, untamed force that confirmed the Council's worst fears, even as it saved her from the artifact's insidious drain. The hall descended into pandemonium. Wolves howled, some in terror, some in awe. The air crackled with the aftermath of her power, smelling of ozone and something ancient, something wild. Elara, overwhelmed by the raw power she had just unleashed, by the sheer force of her own untamed flame, either collapsed onto the cold stone floor, her body trembling with the aftershocks of the surge, or, fueled by a newfound burning rage, she turned and fled, not in fear, not in defeat, but with a fierce vow burning in her heart, to reclaim her truth, to unleash her power on those who sought to control and destroy her, and to make them understand that she was not a sacrifice, she was a force, and her fight had only just begun. The Grand Council Hall had erupted into chaos, a maelstrom of fear and fury. Elara's raw, uncontrolled burst of silver flame, a desperate act of self-preservation, had incinerated Lysander's insidious artifact, but it had also confirmed the Council's deepest fears. She had fled, not in defeat, but with a fierce burning vow to reclaim her truth, to unleash her power on those who sought to control and destroy her. Kaelen's roar, a sound of raw pain and desperate regret, had echoed behind her, a haunting symphony of his anguish, but she hadn't looked back. Her path, however solitary, was now clear. She would face the world and its judgment alone. But the world, it seemed, was not content to wait for her. The betrayal in the Grand Council Hall had fractured Kaelen's pack, tearing at the very fabric of their unity. Lysander's insidious lies, his twisted prophecy, had sown seeds of doubt and fear, turning brother against brother, loyalist against traditionalist. The pack, once a formidable, cohesive force, now splintered, weakened by internal strife and the chilling revelation of treachery from within. Kaelen, his face a mask of grim determination, had tried to rally his remaining loyalists, his voice a gravelly command that resonated with the weight of centuries of leadership. But the fear, the confusion, the deep-seated prejudice against Elara had taken root, poisoning the very air. And the shadow beasts, those gaunt, malevolent creatures of corrupted magic, had sensed the division. They were parasites feeding on fear and discord, and the schism within Kaelen's pack was a feast. Emboldened by the disunity, they launched a full-scale assault, not on the scattered remnants of the pack, but on the very heart of the Shifter lands, the ancient sacred ritual site. This wasn't just a place of ceremony, it was the lifeblood of their existence, a nexus of primal energy, a place vital for their very survival. It was where their ancestors had communed with the earth, where their power was renewed, where their lineage was blessed. If it fell, their people would fall. The sky above the ritual site darkened, not with the approaching night, but with an unnatural oppressive gloom that seemed to suck the light from the air. The ground began to tremble, a deep, resonant shudder that vibrated through the earth, a mournful groan from the very land itself. It wasn't the tremor of an earthquake, but the shudder of something ancient and pure being violated, being torn apart. Kaelen and his remaining loyalists, a desperate, dwindling force, fought valiantly, their snarls echoing through the encroaching darkness. They were outnumbered, outmatched, their strength waning against the relentless tide of shadow. Kaelen, in his massive wolf form, was a blur of obsidian fur and golden eyes, a whirlwind of furious defiance, but even his immense power was not enough to stem the tide. The sacred site, a place of profound beauty and ancient power, began to crack and crumble under the assault. The moss-covered stones, once vibrant with life, now seemed to wither, turning brittle and grey. The ancient trees, those silent sentinels of generations, groaned and splintered, their branches snapping like dry bones. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and dark magic, a suffocating miasma that choked the very breath from their lungs. Despair, cold and insidious, began to creep into the hearts of Kaelen's loyalists. They were losing. The fate of an entire people, the very essence of their existence, hung in the balance, teetering on the precipice of oblivion. Kaelen fought with the desperation of a dying star, his every movement a testament to his unwavering loyalty. But even he, the mighty Alpha, felt the cold tendrils of despair begin to coil around his own heart. He was losing everything: his pack, his home, and the woman he had just vowed to protect. Elara, having fled the chaos of the Grand Council Hall, plunged deeper into the ancient forest, her body still trembling from the raw burst of silver flame she had unleashed. The immediate aftermath of her power, the sheer untamed force of it, had left her disoriented, terrified, and utterly drained. She ran until her lungs burned, and her legs gave out, collapsing in a hidden clearing, surrounded by towering silent pines. The despair that washed over her was absolute, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate her. She was alone again, truly alone. The betrayal had cut deeper than any blade, slicing through the fragile hope she had dared to nurture. Kaelen's roar, his agonizing choice, echoed in her mind, a constant, tormenting reminder of the burden she carried, the chaos she seemed to bring. She was broken, irreparably so. But then, amidst the crushing despair, a flicker, a tiny, defiant spark. It was the image of Kaelen, standing before the condemning council, his face a mask of torment, yet his eyes fixed on hers, his voice a fierce vow: "I choose you." The memory of his unwavering loyalty, his profound belief in her, even when she doubted herself, ignited something deep within her. It was a fragile ember, but it refused to be extinguished. He had chosen her, he had seen her, truly seen her, the flame and the fear, and he had chosen all of her. That choice, that profound act of acceptance, became her anchor, her guiding star in the overwhelming darkness. Driven by this fragile, burgeoning hope, Elara pushed herself up. She didn't know where she was going, only that she was drawn deeper, ever deeper, into the most primal, untouched parts of the ancient forest. It was a place of raw, untamed energy, where the very air thrummed with unseen power, where the trees seemed to breathe with ancient wisdom. She moved instinctively, guided by a pull she couldn't explain, a whisper from the silver flame within her, urging her towards a hidden wellspring of primal energy. She stumbled through dense undergrowth, over moss-covered roots, her body aching, but her spirit resolute. She found it deep within a hidden grotto, a place of breathtaking ethereal beauty. A pool of water, impossibly clear, shimmered with a soft silver light, reflecting the ancient glowing crystals embedded in the cave walls. The air here was thick with energy, a palpable hum that vibrated through her very bones. This was the wellspring. This was where the earth's primal energy converged, where ancient power lay dormant, waiting to be awakened. She knelt beside the pool, her reflection shimmering back at her, a haunted, desperate face. She saw the fear in her own eyes, the lingering doubt, the scars of a lifetime of rejection. Here, in this sacred, untouched place, Elara began her solitary journey of self-acceptance. It was not a gentle process. It was an immense pain, a brutal confrontation with every fear, every insecurity, every accusation that had ever been hurled at her. She meditated, not in stillness, but in a raw, visceral struggle against the very power she had spent her life suppressing. She allowed the silver flame to surge, to burn, to consume her. But this time, she didn't fight it. She embraced it. She let it flow through her, hot and terrifying, purging the fear, burning away the doubt, incinerating the lies. It was like being consumed by a controlled inferno, a purification by fire. Each surge was a wave of agony, but also a wave of profound liberation. She revisited the prophecy, the ancient words that had echoed in her mind at the Sacred Heart. Lysander's twisted version, "The child of the silver flame shall devour the light," had been a cruel mirror, a perversion of the truth. Now, surrounded by the pure energy of the wellspring, the true meaning of the prophecy unfolded before her, clear and undeniable. She was not to destroy, she was to purify. Her flame was not a curse of destruction, but a gift of cleansing, a force meant to burn away corruption, to restore balance, to bring light where there was shadow. The realization was a profound shift, a seismic change in her understanding of herself, of her destiny. She was not a monster, she was a weapon, yes, but a weapon of light, a force for good. This was her inner strength, her true power, a shift from victim to warrior, from hunted to huntress. She was no longer broken, she was becoming whole. Back at the sacred ritual site, the battle raged, a desperate losing fight against the relentless tide of shadow beasts. Kaelen, his fur matted with grime and blood, his body aching with exhaustion, roared his defiance, but his voice was hoarse, his strength waning. His loyalists, a dwindling circle, fought with grim determination, but their numbers were too few, their hope fading. The sky above them was a bruised, oppressive purple, heavy with the stench of decay. The ground beneath their feet trembled violently, the sacred site groaning, its ancient stones cracking, threatening to collapse into dust. The shadow beasts, their eyes burning with malevolent glee, pressed in, their victory seemingly inevitable. Despair, cold and absolute, began to settle over Kaelen's heart. He had failed, he had lost everything. Then, just as Kaelen and his forces were about to be overwhelmed, just as the last vestiges of hope threatened to extinguish completely, a blinding silver light erupted on the horizon. It wasn't the cold, harsh light of the moon, nor the pale glow of dawn. It was a pure, vibrant, living light, pulsing with an ancient power that made the very air crackle. All eyes, human and shadow beast alike, were drawn to it, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. It grew, expanding, consuming the oppressive gloom, pushing back the shadows with its sheer intensity. And then she appeared, Elara, not in human form, not in the guise of a vulnerable girl, but in her true, majestic wolf form. She was a creature of stunning, ethereal beauty, unlike any wolf they had ever seen. Her fur, the color of moonlight on fresh snow, shimmered with an inner silver light, pulsating with the raw power of the flame she had finally embraced. Her eyes, no longer hazel, but twin pools of molten silver, burned with an ancient, fierce determination, reflecting the uninhibited power that now coursed through her. She was not just a wolf, she was the living embodiment of the prophecy, a force of nature unleashed, a goddess of light and fury. Her roar ripped through the air, not a sound of rage, but of pure, unadulterated power, a primal declaration that shook the very foundations of the world. The ground beneath their feet vibrated with the force of it, the ancient trees trembled, and even the shadow beasts recoiled, their malevolent forms flickering in the face of such overwhelming light. "I am not your sacrifice," she boomed, her voice echoing through the land, resonating with an almost divine resonance, a clear, unwavering challenge to the darkness that sought to consume them. It was a cinematic payoff, a visually stunning and emotionally resonant transformation that brought tears to the eyes of Kaelen's loyalists, a surge of hope they hadn't dared to dream of. She was here, she was whole, and she was magnificent. She didn't hesitate. With a powerful, graceful leap, Elara charged into the fray, a silver comet streaking across the battlefield. Her silver flame, no longer a volatile, uncontrollable force, now flowed from her with precision and purpose. It wasn't just fire, it was pure, purifying energy. As she moved, the shadow beasts recoiled, their forms dissolving into shimmering dust upon contact with her light. She wasn't just destroying them, she was cleansing them, turning their corruption into nothingness, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and purified air. The battlefield, once a scene of utter despair, began to glow with her presence, pushing back the oppressive darkness. And as she fought, something else began to happen. The ancient ruins around the sacred site, which had been crumbling under the shadow beast's assault, began to glow. Faint at first, then brighter, until intricate patterns of silver light pulsed along their ancient stones. They awakened, providing a barrier against the remaining darkness, their very presence pushing back the encroaching shadows. It was as if the land itself, recognizing its true champion, was rising to aid her. Kaelen, battered and exhausted, watched her, his golden eyes wide with awe. He had seen her power before, but never like this. Never so controlled, so pure, so utterly magnificent. A surge of renewed vigor coursed through him, banishing the despair. He was awestruck, then filled with a fierce, burning pride. This was the woman he had chosen, the woman he had vowed to protect. He shifted, his own wolf form radiating renewed strength, and charged alongside her, a true alpha to her flame. Together, they were an unstoppable force, a symphony of light and shadow, of primal power and ancient prophecy. Their movements were synchronized, a dance of devastation against the encroaching darkness. Lysander, the puppet master, the insidious architect of Elara's misery, watched from the edge of the battlefield, his pale eyes wide with shock and a dawning terror. His benevolent mask, once so carefully constructed, had finally shattered. He began to shift, his form contorting, revealing his true, corrupted nature. He wasn't just an elder, he was a shadowy, serpent-like creature, his skin scaled and dark, his eyes burning with a malevolent, ancient evil. He was the ultimate villain, the true source of the shadow beasts, the one who had been twisting fate for his own gain, manipulating prophecies and lives for centuries. His true form was a testament to the depths of his depravity, a creature of pure, unadulterated malice. The battle for destiny reached its climax. Elara, now in full control of her power, her silver flame blazing with an intensity that purified the very air, faced Lysander. He hissed and writhed, attempting to lash out with shadowy tendrils, but they dissolved upon contact with her light. She moved with a speed and grace that defied her massive wolf form, circling him, her silver flame engulfing him, not to destroy him outright, but to force him to reveal his darkest secrets. The light burned away his illusions, stripping him bare, forcing him to confess his manipulations, his ancient pacts with darkness, his true identity as the progenitor of the shadow beasts. His lies, his twisted prophecies, his centuries of insidious influence were laid bare for the world to see, exposed by the purifying fire of her truth. Lysander shrieked, a sound of agony and pure, unadulterated rage, as the silver flame consumed him. He dissolved, not into dust, but into a swirling vortex of dark energy, his essence returning to the void from which he had spawned his creatures. The last shadow creature on the battlefield dissolved, leaving behind only the clean, crisp scent of ozone and the quiet hum of the purified land. The battle was won. But as the silence settled, a chilling realization dawned. Lysander was merely a puppet, a pawn in a game far older, far grander than any of them had imagined. The ground trembled again, not from the aftershocks of battle, but from a deeper, primal awakening. It was a tremor that resonated from the very core of the earth, a slow, deliberate shudder that spoke of something ancient, something colossal, stirring from a long, forced slumber. Lysander had been a symptom, not the disease, the true ancient evil, the force that had manipulated him, that had sought to twist the prophecy and plunge the world into darkness, had just begun to stir. The victory was complete, but the war, Elara knew with a cold certainty that settled deep in her bones, had only just begun. The stakes had just been raised, higher than ever before. The roar of Elara's silver flame had silenced the battlefield, turning Lysander and his corrupted shadows to dust. A profound, almost deafening silence descended upon the sacred ritual site, broken only by the ragged breaths of Kaelen's loyalists and the distant, mournful creak of ancient trees. The air, once thick with the stench of decay and dark magic, slowly began to clear, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of ozone and the subtle, earthy aroma of purified land. It was a silence born not of peace but of shock, of the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of what had just transpired. The battle was won, yes, but the cost was clear, etched into the very landscape. The sacred site, once vibrant and pristine, was now scarred. Ancient stones lay cracked and splintered, their surfaces still smudged with the lingering residue of dark magic. Twisted, blackened patches marred the earth where the shadow beasts had dissolved, stark reminders of the corruption that had threatened to consume them all. Yet, even in its wounded state, the site pulsed with a renewed, vibrant energy, a testament to Elara's purifying flame. The silver light that had emanated from her still shimmered faintly in the air, a soft ethereal glow that seemed to mend the very fabric of the land. Slowly, painstakingly, it was a fragile recovery, a deep breath taken after a long, brutal struggle, but it was a beginning. Kaelen stood by Elara, his massive wolf form slowly shifting back to human, his movements fluid, almost reverent. His fur, once matted with grime and blood, seemed to shed the darkness, leaving him clean, powerful, his golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that spoke of awe, of profound relief, and something deeper, something akin to worship. He reached for her, his large hand gently grasping hers, his fingers intertwining with hers, a silent, unwavering connection. His touch was a grounding force, a warm reality in the aftermath of such overwhelming power. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The unspoken communication between them was a language all its own, a shared understanding forged in fire and defiance. The remaining wolves, those who had stood by Kaelen, those who had witnessed Elara's glorious transformation, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and dawning respect. Their faces, once etched with fear and the grim resolve of battle, were now softened by wonder. They had seen her at her most vulnerable, an outcast, condemned. They had seen her at her most powerful, a beacon of light, a force of nature. She had saved them. She had purified their sacred ground, banished the darkness that threatened to consume them all. The whispers that had once condemned her now turned to murmurs of reverence, of gratitude. Yet, even amidst the awe, the memory of their rejection, their fear, still lingered. Elara could feel it, a subtle undercurrent in the air, a hesitant distance in their gazes. They respected her power, yes, but did they truly accept her? Did they truly see beyond the terrifying strength to the woman beneath, the one who had been so deeply wounded by their judgment? It was a moment to breathe, a precious respite from the relentless fight, but it was not a moment for full relaxation. The scars of the past, both physical and emotional, were still fresh. The peace was fragile, a delicate balance poised on the edge of a new, uncertain dawn. Elara's gaze swept over the faces of the wolves, then back to Kaelen, his hand still holding hers, his presence a silent promise. She had faced down the darkness, embraced her power, and found an ally in the most unexpected of places. But the journey was far from over. The tremor that had shaken the earth after Lysander's defeat, the chilling realization that he was merely a puppet, hinted at a greater, more ancient evil stirring beneath the surface. The world had fought back, yes, but it was a world still steeped in fear, in prejudice, in the echoes of old lies. Elara. The name itself now carried a weight, a resonance. The girl once outcast, condemned, hunted for a power she barely understood, now stood as a beacon. A beacon of power, yes, but also a beacon of defiance, of resilience, of a truth that had fought its way through layers of manipulation and fear. She had found her strength, embraced her destiny, and stood tall against the darkness. But for every light, there is always a shadow. For every act of courage, a lingering doubt. Even now, after witnessing her raw strength, after seeing the truths revealed, after feeling the very earth tremble beneath her feet in response to her power, one question lingers in the hearts of those who survived. A question that echoes not just in the ancient forests, but in the quiet corners of our own minds. Would you have chosen her? Would you have seen beyond the fear, beyond the whispers of a cursed flame, beyond the accusations of destruction, or would you have feared her too? Would you have recoiled from her raw, untamed power, seen her as an abomination, a threat to your fragile peace? It's easy to judge from a distance, to condemn what we don't understand. But when faced with such power, such a profound shift in the known order, where would your loyalties lie? Would you stand with the tradition, with the comfortable lies, or would you dare to embrace the terrifying truth? Is she a hero, a savior, destined to lead her people to a new age of light? Or is she just a girl, a young woman burdened by a power too vast, a destiny too heavy to bear? A girl cursed with too much fire, too much raw, untamed energy that threatens to consume not just her enemies, but perhaps herself. Her journey has been one of pain, of rejection, of relentless struggle. She has faced betrayal from those who should have protected her, condemnation from those who should have understood. Her strength is undeniable, her spirit unyielding, but the weight of her destiny, the immense responsibility of wielding such power, is a burden that few could comprehend. Think about it. Imagine the chill of the blizzard, the desperate scramble for survival. Feel the raw terror of being hunted, not for what you've done, but for what you've done, but for what you are. Picture the moment of profound betrayal, when those you thought you could trust turn against you, twisting your truth into a weapon. And then, imagine the surge of power, the silver flame igniting within you, not as a curse, but as a defiant roar against injustice. What would you do? How would you choose? This story, Elara's story, is more than just a tale of shifters and prophecies. It's a journey into the heart of fear and acceptance, of prejudice and profound love. It speaks to the parts of us that feel different, that feel misunderstood, that yearn for a place to belong. It reminds us that true strength often lies not in control, but in embracing the wild, untamed essence of who we truly are. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the narratives we're given, and to find the truth that burns beneath. If this story, if Elara's journey, lit something inside you, a spark of defiance that refuses to be extinguished, a warmth of hope that promises a brighter tomorrow, a longing for a love so true it defies all odds, then don't let the journey end here. Don't let the echoes of this tale fade into the silence. There are more secrets to uncover, more battles to be fought, more destinies to unfold. Join our pack, become a part of our growing family. Hit that subscribe button right now and become a cherished member of Olivia Werewolf Tales, because here with us, the howls of destiny echo through ancient forests, calling to the wild heart within you. Here the moonlight weaves forgotten legends, unveiling truths that have been hidden for centuries. And here, with every tale we tell, we ignite stories that burn with passion, with purpose, and with the untamed, fierce heart of the wolf. Don't miss the next chapter. Your adventure is just beginning.